I drew this illustration inspired by one of the most dramatic fruits out there, and now it's time to bring it to life. Of course, not too long into this project, we ran into the first problem. Like usual, I went over to Blender to sculpt the face, but unlike my other dolls, I was absolutely determined to give her a very specific expression. I'm sure we can all think of a character that has the "I'm disgusted in your existence, but I still look pretty giving you a dirty look" vibe. For the sake of this character, I'm calling this expression the Cruella look.
Yes, aren't they gorgeous? And vicious. It's my favorite combination.
But for this doll, I not only wanted to give her that expression, I wanted her teeth to show, to reinforce the fact that she's a vampire, even though that's a very small detail. I printed my first attempt out with the teeth attached to see if my printer could manage printing such a small detail. I wish I could show you the result of this test, but I somehow lost the head. But you probably already guessed that this didn't turn out very well. I made an updated version of the head, this time making the mouth open a little bit wider and the teeth as a separate piece. I thought this way I would be able to print the teeth better if they weren't attached, or at least I would be able to do several trials without having to waste so much time in filament printing the entire head over and over and over again. Confident that this idea would work, I started working on the face. This is where I somehow ran into another problem. The white paint I was using just refused to go on smoothly, and yeah, I watered it down. Thinking that this was just the best I was going to be able to get, I pushed forward and began working on the face. I did actually finish this face, but we'll come back to that a little later. At this point, it was time to go back and try to figure out those teeth. After several more failed attempts, I finally looked up how to print fine details on a filament printer. I found this video, which recommended changing 2 settings in my slicer program. This did work with cleaning up some of those details a bit, but I still wasn't quite satisfied. But you know what type of printer could print at the detail level I wanted? A resin printer. The type of printer I don't have and couldn't easily get access to. At least, that's what I thought. Now, the way I saw it, there were 3 possible ways I could solve this problem. 1, buy a new printer. 2, contact my high school and see if I could use the printer there. And 3, see if I can get the piece I wanted printed through an Etsy service. I wanted to keep the price of making this doll fairly low, so buying a whole new printer out of the blue wasn't really in the reality of being a solution. As for going back to my high school, I knew that I could because I had previously contacted a teacher of mine to see if I could use this printer for a completely different project at the end of last year. But because the high school I went to is not exactly anywhere near my house, I decided it wouldn't be worth it to drive all that way for just this one tiny little piece. Especially since I wasn't sure how many times I would be able to just waltz in there and print random things. So after thinking about it for a little while, I tried getting the piece I needed printed through a service on Etsy. The shop owner was really nice and helpful, but for some reason there were several points where they just weren't quite understanding what I was asking for. At some point they thought I wanted 50 of these teeth pieces, when the number was never even brought up at any point of our conversation. I figured this person was just really busy and might have been overwhelmed with orders, so after a week of going back and forth, I decided it was just best for me to print the piece myself.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
So going back to option 2, I went ahead and emailed my high school engineering teacher. Fortunately, the next morning he replied saying the printer hadn't been used since I graduated, which was 2 years ago, and that I could drive by and print the piece that I needed. Relieved, I immediately ordered a bottle of resin and my mom drove me up there the following Thursday. I couldn't pick up the pieces the very next day, but I came back the following week. Well, the pieces printed perfectly, but let's just say I didn't just come home with my doll's teeth. Because the printer, aka Symmetra, wasn't being used, I was given the option of just borrowing the entire printer. Of course I wasn't going to pass that up. We don't have a whole lot of room in the house we currently live in, but my mom suggested we clean some space in her sewing room and temporarily set the printer up in there. It's a small room that we can easily ventilate and basically our only option. To make printing even safer, we decided to build an enclosure for the printer.
We would need, I want to say close to 10 of these just to make sure that we have enough to complete the project.
It didn't need to be complicated, just enough to direct those fumes somewhere else. We ended up not finishing it for this project, but you'll definitely see it pop up in some future videos. Now we can finally start working on the doll. Before printing the head again out of resin, I went back to Blender and updated the face sculpt for a third time, making sure I was completely happy with it. With very little sanding and prep work, the pieces are ready to be painted. You may be asking why I went through all that trouble of printing the pieces in white if I was just going to paint over them. Well, resin yellows over time, so not painting them wasn't an option, especially since this character is meant to have bright white skin. When she was dry, I went straight into blushing. Red is very much her main color, so I'm not being shy adding a ton of red eyeshadow. It's probably not that noticeable on camera, but I also had some blue tones to the part of her face that would naturally be cooler, just to add a bit of life. To make the eyeshadow as intense as I have in mind, I do the face in a couple of layers. When I'm completely satisfied, I use a red gouache paint to make some dripping makeup details. I add some black pastels on the edge of her eyes and go on with some more gouache to fill in her lips and of course her eyelashes. Oh, and her eyebrows. Then I grab some white eyelashes and paint them black. Of course, after I did this, I found the style of white eyelashes that I like in black, so I didn't really need to do this, but whatever. Once I stick them on with some careful glue work, this is how the two heads look next to each other. I used the same eyes I made a lot earlier and finally glossed them with UV resin. Fortunately, I didn't have to glue them in place this time since they fit perfectly into the eye sockets. She has this very specific chest detail, so of course I went straight back into Blender. I used these two files I found off of Thingiverse, and if I can find them again, I'll try and link them in the description. Once everything looks good, I slice the file and go and print it on my happy little resin printer now in the basement. The next morning, I wash and cure it. I also went ahead and started printing some other very detailed body parts like the hands. I originally thought I wanted to keep these bones a pearly white, which is why I did so much to avoid them here, but I ended up changing my mind and painting them black anyway. And the reason I changed my mind is because I decided I wanted to cover them in a nice chrome red powder. Chrome tends to look better on a black surface instead of a white, so that's why I ended up painting them black. I cover the bones with a layer of UV resin, which gives the chrome powder a nice surface to stick to. The red wasn't quite the right shade, so I added some red alcohol inks into some more UV resin and then painted it over the chrome. It's very subtle on camera, but I'm telling you this made such a difference. For her hair, I start by gluing some ironed black braiding hair onto the back head panel, but then I stopped there. I'm actually going to be making a partial wig for the front, and that's because I'm determined to give her a very crisp widow's peak. I make this using the usual wood glue and mesh fabric combination. Once it's dry for about 2 days, I roughly, and I do mean roughly, trace on the shape that I want with a white marker. Then I cut it out following the guide. The model head I'm using is a slightly different size than the one I'm actually using for the doll, so I make sure to do a test fitting. It looked really good, so I went ahead and temporarily taped the wig onto the test head and started gluing on the rest of the hair. While I'm doing that, I guess it's time I give you a bit of the background for this character. So the story is she was once married to this king, and quite literally gave her heart to him. His heart in her chest, hers in his. Well, he betrayed her, and her heart was broken. Unable to take the pain, she took back her heart from the king and destroyed it, breaking her soul's link to his. But this left her body with an obvious hole needing to be filled. To stay alive, she had no choice but to be a slave to her new, unusual cravings. This is how she became the first ever vampire. As for the king, she made sure he kept the promise he once made to her. She used his heart to turn him into a shape-shifting beast that would never leave her side. There are still some details in the story I want to work on, but hopefully I'll have all of that figured out by the time I make the king. But anyway, now that you have a little bit of background on this character, it's time to go back to the hair. Even with the careful gluing, there still were some sections where the glue was determined to peek through, but I fixed that easily with a bit of acrylic paint. I kind of made this method up on the go, but I definitely will be using this method in the future for better hairlines on my dolls. It turned out way better than I expected. This was the most complex outfit I've made for a project so far. Taking a look back at the original sketch, I decided it was best to break things up into parts. First thing is the white dress. Now you know I'm not the best at sewing on small scale, so I decided for the chest I would cheat a little bit and wrap the fabric I wanted to use around this 3D printed chest plate. For the rest of the dress though, I decided to use a little bit of help from this tape pattern method. From this, I made the little band that goes underneath the chest. I hand stitch around the edge and then I see how it looks with the other piece. Here you can see me hiring one of my future dolls as a mannequin. She was a lot of help during this process. Before I glue anything together though, I decided to make the bottom of the dress, which is a simple A-line skirt. Once I have that done, I go ahead and stitch the skirt to the waist and then I can finally glue the waist to the chest. Of course I add some pearls and beads because it was entirely too plain for the dramatic essence I was going for. Speaking of dramatic, I'm using this rich red stretch velvet for the coat robe thing. I also use a red silk for the lining. First thing is to make the top of the coat, technically the most intricate section. I use a basic pattern for the main pieces, which is basically how you would make a shirt, only it has a giant gap in the front panel. Here you can see the lining of the fabric, but I only line the back of the jacket because I don't want every single piece to be too thick. That would just be a nightmare to sew. Not to mention unnecessary because you will never see the inside of this jacket ever again. Here I attach the sleeve, which because I want them to form that poof, I double the width of them and then scrunch them to the true measurement. My poor model here doesn't have any arms yet, so the sleeves look extra loose. But again, she's doing a well enough job that you can get the point. The collar is a weird shape, but this is so that the highest point of the collar is behind the head and it will taper as it gets toward the front. I also make the bottom of this piece way longer than it needs to be so I can scrunch it and create those nice satisfying wrinkles. The next part is the pomegranate poof, at least that's what I'm calling it. For this, I'm doubling-ish the width of the bottom of the now made jacket top. Well, I'm doubling the measurement. You can probably tell the scrunch is my best friend for this, so I don't want to limit the drama by not having enough fabric. I put the good sides facing each other, but I only sew the sides together. I'm also going to steal some batting from my mom's stash to place inside the pocket and make that nice curve. I ended up making this coat have a bit of a train, so I made 2 more tiers, but without the poof. I of course stitched those 2 pieces to the upper part of the coat, but you'll have to wait just a little bit longer to see how that came out. For the details, I used a buttload of some very tiny white pearl beads and some of these glass beads I collected from Temu. With those final details added, it's finally time to see the result. Like always, thank you so much for watching, stay sweet, and I'll see you all next time.